I'm going to present my ideas about a revised place for India in Western foreign policy. And also, I see what I'll present here as a kind of, let's say, introduction to what my fellows will go into in more detail. So I would like to start by the fact that an alliance between the US and India seems to many, in the West at least, as an obvious match benefiting both. But in truth, such an alliance faces some serious obstacles from the Western as well as from the Indian side, and to overcome such obstacles, we have to first understand them clearly and then propose how to overcome them. So I will focus on what I see as the two main obstacles and way to overcome them. But before that, I think that as a kind of general background, I think we should understand that something basic about Indian policy and Indian, I would say, the way of government until a decade ago. And basically it's that for more than 6 decades, since India's independence in 1947, basically until 2014, both the internal and external policies of India were based on a way of thinking that was forged by the Congress Party, which ruled the country almost continuously during this period. And it was based on some ideas that have been described very aptly, among others, by Swapan as secularism, socialism, and non-alignment. So I argue that only when these 3 pillars will be successfully replaced by other principles, a real and sustainable alliance could be established between India and the West. And I believe that such an attempt is being, such a replacement is being attempted by Indian political nationalism at the moment. Personally, as a nationalist, I am wishing them well. But this is, I think, the framework with which we should look at this issue. So basically, what I'm saying is that only from the 1990s onward, these 3 pillars were seriously challenged in India by the rise of what might be described as Hindu nationalism. So an outlook that until that period was a bit, well, not a bit, it was a marginal political force. And only from the 1990s, gradually, the BJP, the Indian People's Party, gradually rose during that decade to challenge Congress. And after two short-lived governments, it succeeded in winning a clear political victory in 1999 and served a full term until 2004. But I have to say that even during this first period in power, having to rely on a broad coalition of diverse parties meant that the BJP only marginally challenged those 3 pillars of Congress policies. And so it was only when the BJP returned to power in 2014, achieving under the leadership of Modi an absolute majority for that party alone, that it could move much more decisively to challenge India's course, especially as since then it has won re-election in 2019, even increasing its majority, and again in 2024, although with a decrease in power, it's still in power. So it would be impossible for me here to enter into the detailed description of the BJP challenge to the secularism and socialism pillars of India policy. But it's enough to say that under the BJP government, it has broadly followed the course of having a stronger presence for religion in public life as well as a clearly pro-business economic policy, both challenge these pillars of socialism and secularism. However, I think that it's most important for our purpose to realize that these attempts to steer India toward the more nationalist part are encountering international hostility, not only from the regular suspects, the liberal media, but even from conservative governments and commentators, which are, I would say, imprisoned into this liberal outlook about what is going on there. Indeed, the more India changes course toward a more nationalist and religious political vision, the more it is coming under Western pressure, including from the US State Department, pressures that sees such development with open hostility. So an example of that, just not to remain in the abstract, is the storm of Western criticism that followed the alleged religious bias in India's amended Citizenship Act of 2019. What am I talking about? You might be surprised, or maybe not so surprised, to learn what exactly is the so-called religious and anti-immigration bias that has the US State Department so worried. So in 2019, the BJP government amended the Citizenship Act by providing a path to Indian citizenship for illegal immigrants. They have them in India also, of Hindu, Sikh, Buddhist, Jain, Parsi, or Christian religion. So it extended to those groups a path for becoming Indian citizens if they had fled persecution from Muslim countries. However, this path was not offered or provided to Muslim refugees, since India, I think reasonably, is not interested in further enlarging its Muslim population, and it also considers that several neighboring Muslim states can offer a permanent home to such refugees that would be more in line with their own religion and culture. This was actually the first time that religion has been explicitly a criterion for citizenship in India. But it's certainly not unheard of elsewhere. Several countries, including my own country, Israel, have preferential citizenship track for those of a certain religion or descent. Greece has that too. So many countries decide that certain religions or certain groups have a preferential immigration and citizenship, track. Nevertheless, for some reason, but not some reason, but obvious reasons, India was deemed by liberals as very sinister for deciding on this track. And the liberal establishment in Western countries, which has been always hostile to the BJP, since the very nationalist principles of the BJP go against the core beliefs of Western liberalism. But after 2019, this signaled that the BJP was serious. When it was clear that the BJP is serious about changing India's course in a nationalist direction, liberals' attacks have become frenzied, so that the Indian government is routinely described, if you just live through, or not live, now you look on the internet, but anyway, through the pages of Western media and specialists, they will talk about India undergoing a so-called democratic erosion and as quasi-authoritarian, oppressive, fundamentalist, blah, 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 all these kind of descriptions. So in fact, last I checked, Indian democracy, mind you, the largest democracy on earth, and actually delivering a democracy in circumstances that are not the easiest, if we may say so, today seems more solid than ever. And I think the proof is that the ruling party lost some of its support. So if the election weren't free, it shouldn't happen, but it does happen. So I think that any desire for convergence between the West and India must begin by accepting the increasingly nationalist and religious character of Indian politics. Indeed, myself as a conservative, I propose that this national and religious turn in India must not only be accepted, but in fact celebrated, since many of these, at this very conference, are working in their own countries toward not dissimilar goals, and might even learn something from the Indian example. I will now concentrate on what I see as the third aspect of the Congress legacy, the so-called non-alignment or strategic autonomy in foreign policy, since we are talking about India's place within the foreign policy alignment of the West. So, during the Cold War, India did not align itself with either side, and indeed it was one of the leaders and the founders of the non-aligned group of countries. However, I would note that while many of the so-called non-aligned states were actually quite close to the communist bloc, this was in fact not the case of India, and in many respects it's always remained far closer to the West than the communist bloc, especially in its being a vibrant democracy with free speech tradition and so on. It was naturally closer to the West in this sense. Nevertheless, it's true that in strategic terms, India has always maintained robust ties with the Russians, especially so in the 70s and 80s, when, we have to remember, the US cultivated China as a strategic counterweight to the Soviets, and also cultivated Pakistan as its prime South Asian protege. Thus, basically, what I'm arguing is that India was, in a sense, to some extent at least, pushed to regard Moscow as the only great power support it can have, since the US is supporting the two countries that generate recurring clashes with India, meaning both China and Pakistan had wars and other border problems and so on with India. So we should see the distance between the West and India in this context, not only as a result of Indian choice, but also of Western choice of working towards Pakistan and China. As a result of its non-alignment, India played for decades what I might say it's an underwhelming role in the international arena, with a far smaller imprint than India's relative size would indicate. And basically, strategic autonomy meant a reduced clout in a bipolar international arena. But since the end of the Cold War, and especially in the last decade, under the BJP leadership, India is indicating an ambition to play a more significant role on the international scene. It is obvious that advancing to the status of a great power entails some significant choices that India will have to make. But by definition, a great power cannot really be non-aligned or autonomous, but rather takes a leading role in the international arena. Otherwise, it's not a great power. So either India will lead on its own path or ally with others, but it will have to define for itself a far more active and substantive role in international affairs. So indeed, we are beginning to see a more assertive India in international affairs, and this is reflected by its membership in several relatively new international forums, like the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, commonly known as the Quad, with Australia, Japan, and the United States. Also the I2U2 with the United Arab Emirates, Israel, and the US, and the Missile Technology Control Regime. Now note that all of these forums are actually Western-aligned partnerships. Moreover, India today holds more joint military exercises with the US than with any other country. So clearly, there is the US and India are becoming increasingly close. However, all these new areas of cooperation are still far from a complete strategic convergence or a full alliance. India still imports much of its armaments from Russia, and it is a major buyer of sanctioned Russian oil. Also, on the issue of Ukraine, India adopted a far more prudent position than the US would have liked. Similarly, India's relationship with Iran is far less confrontational than the West. The truth is that India does not have any vital strategic conflict of interest with either Russia or Iran, and currently benefits from good relations with them. So it's not very surprising that as late as 2023, Indian Foreign Minister Jai Shankar argued that a formal India-US alliance is not on the cards on India's side. Thus, we could say that under the BJP, although certainly closer to the West, India continues for the time being to navigate with a principle of strategic autonomy. However, I think that this Indian position would change only if there is a challenge to interests that India regards as vital, that would bring her to fully ally with the West to defend those interests. And it appears to me that such a challenge to Indian vital interests is actually rising, and that Delhi is increasingly aware of this. And this is the challenge that an increasingly aggressive China, which wishes to exert its hegemony across Asia, present to many, but certainly to India. We must remember that India has long-standing border disputes with China, which sometimes erupt into full war, like in 1962, or more often into little skirmishes, and the last one occurring in 2020, so 4 years ago. Basically, China has actively occupied the Aksai area that used to be part of Kashmir in northwestern India, and China also lies claims to some parts of the northeastern Indian state of Arunachal Pradesh. But that border conflicts is far from all. China is increasingly aligned with Pakistan, which Pakistan itself is a major threat to India because of ongoing border disputes, as well as the Pakistani sponsorship of anti-Hindu Islamist terrorists. This is not just a general, I would say, affinity between China and Pakistan, but actually China is making Pakistan a central component of its South Asia policy, including creating the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor leading to the port of Gwadar, being developed by the China Overseas Port Holding Company, thus gaining for China a presence on the northern shores of the Indian Ocean, very close to India itself. Meanwhile, China is also rapidly developing its capacity to project naval power into the Indian Ocean, both from the western reaches. China's only foreign naval base is in Djibouti, in Africa, which is on the Indian Ocean, and as well as other advances by China in the near the Andaman Sea, where India has territorial assets. So we can see why India is feeling increasingly wary of being possibly surrounded by Chinese threats or Chinese-connected threats. So the convergence between China and Pakistan, India's two nuclear-armed neighbors, with which it has several simmering border disputes, is, from the Indian perspective, the creation of a nefarious axis posing a vital strategic threat. Thus, a common China policy is the crucial point of strategic convergence between America and India. But this is only if the US abandons attempts to cozy up to Beijing, which the current administration in the US is actually pursuing, and recognize China as its main strategic adversary. The convergence between India and the US on a common China policy would entail not merely a military and diplomatic alliance, but also many other economic, cultural, and research and development aspects. Thus, as the US and the West aim to decouple their economically from China, there will be an effort to integrate with the Indian economy as the substitute for at least some of the activities now dominated by Chinese industry. India can also become a main source for the engineering and manufacturing manpower that the West is currently in so a dire need of replenishing. So, finishing, I believe that to indicate the importance that they assign to the future role future international role of India as a strategic ally, the US and its allies should take upon themselves to publicly advance and support India becoming a permanent member of the UN Security Council. This would send a powerful message abroad and also convince those in India that are still suspicious of US intentions that the realignment and alliance with the US and its allies are here to stay. Thank you very much.